I never thought I'd see my father's face turn that particular shade of gray. The kind of ashen color that washes over someone when they realize they've made a terrible, irreversible mistake. But there he was, sitting across from me at the mahogany table in Mr. Peterson's law office, looking like he'd seen a ghost. "Let's proceed with the reading of Mrs. Eleanor Wright's last will and testament," Mr. Peterson announced, adjusting his glasses and clearing his throat. The small conference room felt suffocating despite its size. My stepmother Diane sat next to my father, her hand possessively clutching his arm, while her two sons, Mark and Trevor, flanked her other side like bodyguards. I sat alone on the opposite side of the table. It had been 3 weeks since my grandmother Eleanor passed away. 3 weeks of hushed conversations behind closed doors whenever I walked into a room. 3 weeks of strange, knowing smiles from Diane and her sons. And exactly 2 weeks since that day in the driveway, the day my father delivered what he thought was the final blow. I still remember every detail. It was a crisp Tuesday morning, and I had stopped by my childhood home to pick up the last of my belongings. My father was backing his Mercedes out of the garage as I pulled in. "Oh, good. You're here," he said, rolling down his window. His tone was casual, but something in his eyes looked different. Colder. "Diane wanted me to tell you not to bother looking for the house deed paperwork anymore." My heart sank. For months, I had been asking about the status of my grandmother's house, the beautiful Victorian on Maple Street that she had always promised would be mine someday. The house where I'd spent summers helping her plant roses and winters curled up by the fireplace listening to her stories. "What do you mean?" I asked, already feeling the familiar knot forming in my stomach. "They took your name off the house," my dad said with a slight shrug, as if he was telling me we were out of milk. "Grandmother signed new papers before she passed. The house is going to the boys now." The way he said the boys, like Mark and Trevor, both in their 30s, were somehow more deserving of my grandmother's legacy than her only granddaughter. The same boys who had visited her exactly twice in the 5 years since their mother married my father. "That's not possible," I whispered, but my father was already putting the car in reverse. "Sorry, kiddo. That's just how it is." Then he drove off, leaving me standing in the driveway of what was once my home, feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. For days afterward, I couldn't sleep. My grandmother had promised me that house since I was a little girl. "This will be your sanctuary someday," she'd told me countless times. "A place that's all yours that no one can take away from you." I tried calling my father's attorney, but was told they couldn't discuss the matter with me. I even drove by the county records office, but without knowing exactly what documents to look for, I was lost. Then came the call about the will reading. I almost didn't go. What was the point? According to my father, everything had already been decided, but something inside me, perhaps my grandmother's voice in my head saying, "Stand your ground," pushed me to attend. And now here we were, at 10:26 a.m. on a Thursday, sitting in uncomfortable silence as Mr. Peterson sorted through his papers. "Before we begin," Mr. Peterson said, his eyes briefly meeting mine, "I should note that Mrs. Wright made some very specific instructions about how this proceeding should be conducted." Diane shifted in her seat, her perfectly manicured nails now drumming impatiently on the table. "We're all family here, Mr. Peterson. I'm sure we can dispense with any unnecessary formalities." The lawyer gave her a tight smile. "I'm afraid Mrs. Wright was quite clear on this matter. There's a letter to be read first, before any distributions are announced." I watched my father fidget with his tie. In the 20 years since my mother died, I had learned to read the subtle signs of his discomfort. The slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, the way he couldn't quite keep his hands still. Mr. Peterson pulled out an envelope sealed with my grandmother's distinctive wax stamp, a small E pressed into dark blue wax. Mrs. Wright instructed that this letter be read aloud, in its entirety, before proceeding. The lawyer broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside. "To my family," he read in a clear voice. "If you're hearing this, then I have left this world. hopefully having lived a life worth remembering. Before the legal details are addressed, I want to speak from my heart. I could almost hear my grandmother's voice in the words, firm but gentle. I have watched, with increasing concern, how money and possessions have begun to matter more than love and respect in this family. I have seen alliances form, not out of affection, but out of greed and opportunity. Diane's drumming fingers went still. Mark and Trevor exchanged glances. I have seen my only son, William, become someone I barely recognize, a man who would choose comfort and convenience over standing up for what's right. Mr. Peterson paused briefly, glancing at my father, whose face had grown noticeably pale. And I have watched my only granddaughter, Emily, face rejection and dismissal from the very people who should have cherished her, yet never lose her dignity or her compassion. At the mention of my name, I felt tears welling up. My grandmother had seen everything, every slight, every excuse, every time I was pushed aside in favor of Diane's sons. So I have made my decisions carefully, with full understanding of the consequences they will bring. Not out of malice, but out of love, even for those who may not recognize it as such. Mr. Peterson folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. That concludes Mrs. Wright's preliminary statement. Now, shall we proceed to the distribution of assets? Diane leaned forward, her face a mask of controlled anticipation. Yes, please do. The lawyer nodded and opened the formal will document. I, Eleanor Margaret Wright, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, thereby revoking all previous wills and codicils. The formal legal language washed over us as Mr. Peterson read through the initial declarations. I barely heard the words until he reached the first substantive provision. Regarding my primary residence at 1842 Maple Street, Mr. Peterson continued, and all land, fixtures, and contents therein. I held my breath, preparing myself for the confirmation of what my father had told me in the driveway. I hereby confirm that this property shall pass, in its entirety, to Emily Grace Wright, my granddaughter. The room went silent. Even Mr. Peterson stopped for a moment, as if allowing the words to sink in. What? Diane's voice cut through the silence like a knife. There must be some mistake. My father's face had turned that peculiar shade of gray. His eyes darted to me, then quickly away, unable to hold my gaze. Mr. Peterson adjusted his glasses. There is no mistake, Mrs. Wright. The house on Maple Street is bequeathed to Emily, as has been legally documented since Mrs. Eleanor Wright purchased it 25 years ago. It has always been in a trust with Emily named as the beneficiary upon Mrs. Wright's passing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and I gripped the edge of the conference table to steady myself. That's impossible, my father said, his voice strained and unfamiliar. Mother changed her mind. She signed new papers. I saw them. Mr. Peterson looked genuinely confused. I have no record of any such documents, Mr. Wright. The trust for the Maple Street property has remained unchanged since it was established. Show me, Diane demanded, her composure slipping. I want to see these supposed trust documents. The lawyer nodded and pulled another folder from his briefcase. I anticipated this request and brought copies for everyone. He slid documents across the table to each of us. As you can see, the trust was established on Emily's 10th birthday. The house was placed in trust with Mrs. Eleanor Wright as trustee until her death, at which point full ownership transfers to Emily. I looked down at the papers in front of me, my grandmother's elegant signature at the bottom of the page. Next to it was a smaller signature that I recognized as my own childish handwriting from when I was 10 years old. I remembered that day now. Grandma had taken me out for ice cream and then to sign some important papers. I hadn't understood their significance then. This is dated 15 years ago, I said quietly. Correct, Mr. Peterson confirmed. The trust has been in place all this time. But what about the papers Mother signed last month? My father insisted, a hint of desperation in his voice now. I was there. She transferred everything to Mark and Trevor. Mark leaned forward, his usual smug expression replaced by confusion. Dad, what are you talking about? We never signed anything about Grandma's house. The lawyer shook his head. No such documents were ever filed with my office or with the county recorder. I've been Mrs. Wright's attorney for 30 years. She would not have made such a significant change without consulting me. A horrible suspicion began to form in my mind. I looked at my father, searching his face for the truth. Dad, what did Grandma actually sign? He wouldn't meet my eyes. It doesn't matter now. I believe it does, Mr. Peterson interjected. If there's been some misrepresentation, it was a health directive, my father blurted out. Mother was confused in her final weeks. Diane suggested we should have medical power of attorney, in case decisions needed to be made. Diane's head snapped toward him. William. The warning in her voice was unmistakable. But my father continued, words tumbling out now as if a dam had broken. She told me it would be better if Mother signed while she was still lucid, that we could handle the property transfers afterward, that no one would question it since I was the only child. I felt sick. You lied to Grandma about what she was signing? She was confused, he repeated weakly. She wouldn't have understood anyway. Mr. Peterson's expression had turned grave. Mr. Wright, what you're describing could constitute fraud and elder abuse. It wasn't like that, my father protested. We were just trying to make things simpler. Simpler for whom? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. You told me Grandma took my name off the house. You drove away like you'd won some kind of victory. Diane thought, Don't you dare blame this on me, Diane hissed. You're the one who couldn't stand up to your mother while she was alive. You're the one who promised me we'd fix things after she was gone. My father seemed to shrink in his chair. For the first time, I saw him clearly, not as the strong father figure I'd always wanted him to be, but as a weak man who had allowed himself to be manipulated, and in turn, had tried to manipulate others. I think, Mr. Peterson said, gathering his papers, we should take a brief recess before continuing with the rest of the will. There are clearly some matters that need to be discussed privately. As everyone began to rise, the lawyer added, and I should note, for the record, that as of this moment, Emily is the legal owner of the Maple Street property. Any personal belongings still in the house should remain undisturbed until she has had an opportunity to inspect the premises. Diane's face flushed with anger. We live there now. You can't just expect us to. Actually, Mrs. Wright, the house has never been your legal residence. Mr. Peterson corrected her. You and your family have been living there with the permission of the trustee, Mrs. Eleanor Wright. Now that she has passed, that permission transfers to the new owner. He nodded in my direction. The implications of his words sank in slowly. The house was mine. It had always been mine, and my father and Diane had been trying to steal it from me. As everyone filed out of the conference room for the recess, my father attempted to approach me. Emily, please, you have to understand. I held up my hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Not now, Dad. Maybe not ever. Left alone in the conference room, I allowed myself a moment to process what had just happened. The house on Maple Street, my grandmother's beautiful Victorian with the wraparound porch and the rose garden in the back, was mine. The home where I had felt safe and loved when my own home had become increasingly hostile after Diane entered our lives. I thought about my grandmother's letter. She had seen everything. She had protected me in the only way she could, by making legally binding arrangements that even my father and Diane couldn't undo. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see Diane gesturing angrily at my father in the hallway, while Mark and Trevor stood awkwardly to the side. Their perfect family tableau was cracking right before my eyes. A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Mr. Peterson poked his head in. May I have a word with you in private, Ms. Wright? I nodded, and he slipped back into the room, closing the door behind him. "There are a few things your grandmother asked me to tell you privately," he said, taking the seat next to mine rather than returning to the head of the table. His formal demeanor softened slightly. "Was it true? About the trust? Has it really been in my name all this time?" "Absolutely," he confirmed. "Your grandmother set it up after your mother passed away. She wanted to ensure you always had a home that was truly yours, no matter what happened." "And she never changed her mind? Even when she was sick?" Mr. Peterson shook his head. "Eleanor was sharp as a tack until the very end. She called me 2 days before she passed away, in fact. She wanted to make sure everything was in order." I felt a tear slide down my cheek. She knew what they were trying to do, didn't she? "Your grandmother was nobody's fool," he said with a small smile. "She suspected your father and his wife might try something. That's why she asked me to bring copies of all the documentation today. She wanted there to be no question about her intentions." "What happens now?" I asked, glancing toward the hallway where my father and Diane were still arguing. "That's entirely up to you," Mr. Peterson said. "The house is yours. You can move in immediately if you wish, or sell it, or continue to allow your father and his family to live there, though I wouldn't recommend that last option given the circumstances." The weight of the decision felt enormous. "Did Grandma leave any advice about that?" The lawyer smiled. "As a matter of fact, she did." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope with my name written on it in my grandmother's handwriting. "She asked me to give you this after the initial shock had worn off." I took the envelope with trembling fingers. "Thank you." "Take your time," he said, standing. "We still have the rest of the will to get through, but it can wait until you're ready." After he left, I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of notepaper with my grandmother's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, then Peterson has done his job, and you now know the truth about the house. It has always been yours, my love. A sanctuary that no one can take away from you. I suspect today has been difficult and full of painful revelations. For that, I am truly sorry. I had hoped your father would be a better man than he has shown himself to be. Here is my advice, for whatever it may be worth. The house is yours, but don't let it define you. Use it as a foundation to build the life you want, not as a weapon to punish those who have wronged you. Your father is weak, not evil. Diane saw that weakness and exploited it. I don't ask you to forgive them. That must come in your own time, if ever. But I do ask you not to let bitterness take root in your heart the way it did in mine after your grandfather died. Be stronger than I was. Be happier. All my love, always, Grandma Eleanor." I folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into the envelope. Through my tears, I could see my father watching me anxiously through the glass wall. For the first time in years, he looked afraid. Not of Diane's disapproval, but of losing me completely. Taking a deep breath, I stood up and walked to the door. It was time to face the rest of the will reading, and the rest of my life, with the same dignity and grace my grandmother had shown until the end. I stepped back into the conference room with my grandmother's letter tucked safely in my pocket. The atmosphere had changed dramatically. Tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. Diane sat rigidly in her chair, lips pressed into a thin line, while my father seemed to have aged 10 years in the span of 15 minutes. Mark and Trevor looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and avoiding eye contact with everyone. Mr. Peterson nodded at me as I took my seat. "Shall we continue with the reading?" I straightened my shoulders. "Yes, please proceed." The lawyer adjusted his glasses and returned to the document. "Regarding my financial assets, including all bank accounts, investment portfolios, and retirement funds," Diane leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. "I hereby establish a trust to be managed by my attorney, Frederick Peterson, with the following distribution schedule. Mr. Peterson turned the page. 50% of all financial assets are to be distributed to Emily Grace Wright immediately upon my passing. I heard Diane's sharp intake of breath, but kept my eyes fixed on the document in front of me. 25% shall be held in trust for any future children Emily may have, to be distributed for their education and well-being as the trustee sees fit. My heart squeezed. Even in death, my grandmother was thinking of a future family I might someday have. The remaining 25% shall be distributed to my son, William Wright, with the stipulation that these funds are for his sole use and benefit, and cannot be accessed by or transferred to his current spouse or stepchildren. What? Diane's voice cracked through the room. That's ridiculous. We're family, Mr. Peterson continued as if he hadn't heard her. In the event that William predeceases me, his portion shall be added to Emily's share rather than passing to his spouse. My father placed a restraining hand on Diane's arm. Let's just hear the rest, he murmured. Mr. Peterson nodded and continued. Regarding my personal effects, artwork, jewelry, and family heirlooms, I direct that Emily shall have first choice of any items she wishes to keep, particularly those with sentimental value related to her mother, Sarah. I thought of my mother's pearl necklace that Grandma had always kept safe for me, and the watercolor paintings my mother had created as a young woman. I had asked about them months ago, but Diane had said they were probably packed away somewhere. After Emily has selected the items she wishes to retain, William may choose items of significance to him. Any remaining items may be sold, with proceeds added to the main estate. The lawyer turned to another page. Regarding my personal letters, diaries, and private papers, these are to be given directly to Emily, unopened and unread by anyone else. I wondered what secrets those papers might contain, what family history and personal reflections my grandmother had wanted to share only with me. Additionally, I hereby establish a separate educational fund of $100,000 for each of my step-grandchildren, Mark and Trevor Wright, to be used exclusively for further education, professional certification, or business startup costs. These funds are not transferable and will expire if not used within 10 years of my passing. At this, Mark and Trevor both looked up in surprise. Despite everything, my grandmother had thought of them too, though in a carefully controlled way. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. Finally, regarding the family vacation property in Lake Tahoe, I hadn't even considered the lake house. It had been years since I'd visited the beautiful cabin where we'd spent so many summer vacations before my mother died. This property shall be placed in a separate trust, with Emily and William as equal beneficiaries. Neither may sell their interest without the other's consent. All maintenance costs and property taxes shall be divided equally between them. Diane's face flushed with anger. That property was supposed to be ours. We've been planning to renovate it next summer. My father looked away, unable to meet her eyes or mine. I wondered how many promises he had made about assets that were never his to give. That concludes the material provisions of Mrs. Wright's will, Mr. Peterson said, closing the folder. Are there any questions I can address at this time? This is outrageous, Diane said, standing up abruptly. Eleanor was clearly not in her right mind when she made these arrangements. We'll contest the will. Mr. Peterson remained unruffled. You are certainly entitled to try, Mrs. Wright. However, I should inform you that Mrs. Eleanor Wright underwent a complete psychological evaluation just 3 months ago, specifically to prevent such challenges. The evaluation confirmed she was of sound mind and under no undue influence. Additionally, most of these arrangements, including the house trust and the financial distributions, were established years ago and have been regularly reviewed and reaffirmed. This isn't over, Diane snapped, gathering her designer handbag. William, we're leaving. Mark, Trevor, come on. My father hesitated, looking at me with pleading eyes. Emily. Just go, Dad, I said quietly. We'll talk another time. After they left, Mr. Peterson handed me a thick envelope. These are copies of all the relevant documents. including keys to both properties and information on accessing your accounts. The originals are in my office safe." "Thank you," I said, feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility that had suddenly been placed on my shoulders. "I don't even know where to start." The lawyer's expression softened. "Your grandmother suggested you might feel that way. She left instructions for me to help you through the transition. Take a few days to process everything, then call my office when you're ready to discuss next steps." As I drove home to my small apartment, my mind was spinning. The house on Maple Street was mine. Half of my grandmother's considerable financial assets were mine. I had a stake in the lake house. After years of feeling pushed aside and devalued, I suddenly found myself in a position of unexpected power. My phone rang incessantly throughout the evening. First my father, then Mark, then even Trevor. I let all the calls go to voicemail. I needed time to think, to process, to decide what kind of person I wanted to be in this new reality. Around midnight, I finally listened to my father's message. "Emily, please call me back. I know you're upset, and you have every right to be. What I did, what we tried to do, it was wrong. I can't justify it. But please, don't cut me out completely. I'm still your father. I still love you, even if I've done a terrible job of showing it." His voice broke on the last words, and for the first time in years, I heard the father I remembered from my childhood. The man who had carried me on his shoulders and taught me to ride a bike. The man who had existed before grief and weakness led him down a different path. I didn't call him back that night, but I didn't delete the message either. The next morning, I drove to Maple Street. The Victorian house looked just as I remembered. Graceful and welcoming, with morning light filtering through the stained glass panels beside the front door. I parked across the street, not quite ready to use my key and assert my ownership. As I sat there, the front door opened, and Diane emerged with an armful of what looked like framed photographs. She loaded them into the trunk of her luxury SUV, then returned to the house for another load. I watched as she and the boys systematically carried out items, filling the SUV until it was packed to the ceiling. My first instinct was anger. They were taking things that might rightfully be mine. But then I remembered my grandmother's letter. The house was mine, but I shouldn't let it define me. I shouldn't use it as a weapon. Taking a deep breath, I got out of my car and walked across the street. Diane spotted me when I was halfway up the front walk. Her expression hardened, and she quickly called to Mark and Trevor, who appeared in the doorway behind her. "Emily," she said coldly, "come to inspect your property." "Actually, I came to talk," I replied, keeping my voice calm, "about how we move forward from here. There's nothing to discuss. Your grandmother made her choices. Apparently, she never considered us family at all." I glanced at the packed SUV. "It looks like you're taking some things." "Just what belongs to us," Diane said defensively. "Personal items we brought when we moved in." I nodded. "That's fine. I don't want to make this any more difficult than it needs to be." Trevor stepped forward, surprising me. Of the two brothers, he had always been the quieter one, the one who sometimes smiled at me apologetically when his mother was being particularly cutting. "Emily, for what it's worth, Mark and I didn't know anything about. We weren't part of that." Mark nodded reluctantly. "We thought Grandma Eleanor wanted Dad and Mom to have the house. That's what they told us." I believed them. The deception had been my father's and Diane's alone. "I appreciate you telling me that," I said. "And I hope you know that Grandma did think of you. The education funds she set up." "We saw the paperwork this morning," Trevor said. "It was unexpected. Kind, actually." Diane made an impatient noise. "Your father's meeting with our attorney this afternoon." I met her eyes directly. "You're really going to contest the will?" "Of course we are. William is Eleanor's only child. He deserves more than a measly quarter of her estate and half a lake house." I sighed. Mr. Peterson seemed pretty confident about Grandma's arrangements. Lawyers can be wrong, she said dismissively. We'll see what our attorney says. Just then, he got out slowly, looking warily between Diane and me, as if expecting an explosive confrontation. Emily, he said, his voice rough. I didn't expect to see you here. I was just talking with Diane and the boys, I explained. They're taking their personal belongings. He nodded, then turned to his wife. Diane, can you give us a minute? I need to speak with Emily alone. She looked like she wanted to refuse, but something in his expression must have convinced her. Boys, let's finish up with the guest room. After they disappeared into the house, my father gestured to the porch swing, the same swing where my grandmother and I had spent countless hours together. Can we sit? I followed him onto the porch, maintaining a careful distance as we sat down. I called off the meeting with the attorney, he said after a moment. What? But Diane just said. I know what she said. She doesn't know yet. He ran a hand through his graying hair. I can't fight you over this, not after what I already tried to do. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but saw only exhaustion and regret. Mother was right about me in her letter, he continued. I have become someone else, someone I never wanted to be. When your mother died, I was so lost, so broken. Diane seemed strong in all the ways I wasn't. I leaned on her more and more until that doesn't excuse trying to steal my inheritance, I said quietly. No, it doesn't. Nothing excuses that. He looked out at the front yard, where spring tulips were beginning to emerge in the flower beds my grandmother had so lovingly tended. I've been lying to myself for years, telling myself that everything I did was for our family, for our new family. But the truth is, I've been a coward. I took the easy path every time. What are you going to do about Diane? She seemed pretty determined to fight this. He sighed heavily. I don't know. Things between us, they haven't been good for a long time. The situation has just made the cracks more visible. We sat in silence for a few moments, the porch swing creaking gently beneath us. Emily, I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or maybe ever. But I want you to know that I'm going to try to be better, to be the father you deserve. I don't know if I can trust that, Dad. You've said similar things before. I know. Words don't mean much at this point, but I'm hoping that, with time, my actions will speak louder. The front door opened, and Diane appeared with another armful of items. She stopped short when she saw us sitting together. William, what's going on? My father stood up. Diane, we need to talk. I've made a decision about the will. Her eyes narrowed. What decision? Mother's wishes were clear, and they were fair. Fair? She sputtered. How is any of this fair to us? Us? My father repeated. Or you? Because from where I'm standing, this has always been about what you want, what you think you deserve. I had never heard my father speak to Diane this way, and from her shocked expression, neither had she. If you want to fight Emily for the inheritance, you'll be doing it alone, he continued. I won't be part of it. Diane's, after everything I've done for you, for this family, you're choosing her over us? I'm choosing to do what's right, my father said firmly. For once. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change. True to his word, my father refused to contest the will, despite Diane's increasingly desperate attempts to convince him otherwise. Their arguments echoed through the neighborhood, according to Mrs. Henley next door, who called to give me regular updates. I gave my father and Diane 30 days to find a new place and move out of the Maple Street house. It was more generous than I needed to be, according to Mr. Peterson, but it felt like the right thing to do. I didn't want to force an immediate, chaotic exodus, especially since I wasn't ready to move in myself. My tiny apartment lease had 3 months remaining, and I needed time to process. 2 weeks after the will reading, my father called to tell me that he and Diane were separating. "It's been coming for a long time," he admitted. "This situation with the will just forced us to face the truth." "I'm sorry," I said, surprised to find that I meant it. No matter what Diane had done, I knew my father had genuinely cared for her once. "Don't be," he replied. "It's for the best. I haven't been happy. Really happy. I've just been going through the motions, taking the path of least resistance. What about Mark and Trevor? They're grown men with their own lives. They're actually being surprisingly supportive. I think they saw things between their mother and me that I didn't realize were so obvious. We spoke a few more times that week, careful conversations that skimmed the surface of deeper issues. It wasn't forgiveness, not. Meanwhile, I spent my evenings sorting through the documents Mr. Peterson had given me. My grandmother's financial affairs were impressively organized, with detailed records of every account and investment. The trust she had established would provide me with financial security I had never imagined possible. I could finish my master's degree without working 2 jobs. I could travel. I could do all the things I had put on hold but with these new possibilities came difficult questions. Did I want to live in the Maple Street house with all its memories and complications? Did I want to keep my half of the lake house, knowing I would have to coordinate with my father on its maintenance and use? How much of my grandmother's legacy did I want to incorporate into my own life? By the time the 30-day mark arrived, I took a day off work and drove to Maple Street, ready to enter the house as its official owner for the first time. Mrs. Henley was watering her front garden as I pulled up. She waved enthusiastically. "Emily, dear, I was hoping I'd see you today. Your father and that woman left yesterday. Separate cars, separate directions." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. I think she took more than she should have, but what do I know? I smiled. Henley had been my grandmother's friend for decades. "Thank you for keeping an eye on things." "Oh, any time, dear. Eleanor would have wanted me to. She was so proud of you, you know. Always talking about her brilliant granddaughter." With those warming words following me, I walked up to the front door and used my key for the first time. The house was quieter than I remembered, emptier in some ways. Diane's modern decorative touches had been removed, leaving bare, but the bones of the house, the beautiful woodwork, the stained glass, the creaky third step on the staircase, remained unchanged. I wandered through the rooms, trailing my fingers along familiar surfaces. In the living room, the antique grandfather clock still ticked steadily, just as it had throughout my childhood. My grandmother had wound it faithfully every Sunday evening, a ritual I had often watched from the kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon and vanilla, my grandmother's favorite baking scents. I opened the spice cabinet and found her handwritten labels still attached to each jar, her elegant script identifying contents and purchase dates. Upstairs, I hesitated outside the master bedroom. This had been my grandmother's most private space, a sanctuary I had entered only by special invitation. Taking a deep breath, the room had been stripped of personal items. No photographs on the dresser, no books on the nightstand, no colorful throw pillows on the window seat. But the heavy antique furniture remained, along with the hand-stitched quilt at the foot of the bed. I sat down on the edge of the mattress, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. This was my house now, all of it. The responsibility felt enormous. On the bedside table, I noticed something had been left behind. I picked it up and recognized my grandmother's diary, the one she had kept by her bed for as long as I could remember. Opening to a random page, I saw an entry from 2 years ago. William brought his new wife and her sons to dinner today. I tried to be welcoming, but there is something calculating in Diane's eyes that troubles me. She asked too many questions about my will and financial arrangements. When I changed the subject, her smile became, I worry about the influence she has over William. He has always been easily led, especially since Sarah died. I must find a way to protect Emily's inheritance without causing a family rift. I closed the book, not wanting to read more just yet. There would be time for that later, when I was ready to face all the family's secrets and observations. As I continued exploring the house, I found other items that had been left behind. A box of old photographs in the hall closet, my mother's watercolors stacked in the spare bedroom, family recipe cards still in the kitchen drawer. Whether overlooked in haste or deliberately abandoned, each item felt like a small gift, a piece of family history preserved for me. In the study, I found my grandmother's desk untouched, her papers neatly arranged as if she had just... I sat in her chair, running my hands over the smooth wooden surface where she had written countless letters, paid bills, and managed the household accounts. The bottom drawer was locked, but the small key was exactly where it had always been, taped to the underside of the central drawer. Inside, I found a manila envelope with my name written on it. With trembling hands, I opened it and found they were addressed to me, dated over the past 10 years, but never sent. I unfolded the top one and began to read. My dearest Emily, there are things I want to tell you, but the time never seems right. Your father's marriage to Diane has created a delicate situation, and I fear causing more tension in your already strained relationship with him. So I write these letters instead, hoping that someday I can share them with you. I want you to know how proud I am of the woman you've become. Despite the difficulties you've faced, losing your mother so young, your father's emotional absence, and now this uncomfortable new family dynamic, you have remained kind, resilient, and true to yourself. Your mother would be so proud of you too. I worry sometimes that you don't know how much you are loved, that all the noise and drama created by Diane and her sons has made you feel less important. Nothing could be further from the truth. You are the heart of this family, Emily. The best of your mother and the best of the Wright family tradition of strength and integrity. I've made arrangements to ensure that your future is secure, regardless of what happens within the family. The house on Maple Street will be yours when I'm gone. I hope it will be a sanctuary for you, as it has been for me. A place where you can build your own traditions, and perhaps some... Until then, know that you are in my thoughts every day. All my love, Grandma. Tears streamed down my face as I carefully refolded the letter. There were dozens more in the stack, a chronicle of my grandmother's love and concern over the years. I would read them all eventually, but not today. Today was for beginnings, not endings. I wiped my eyes and looked around the study, seeing it with new perspective. This house wasn't just a valuable asset or a symbol, it was a gift of love, a tangible expression of my grandmother's desire to protect and provide for me. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my father. Emily, are you at the house? Yes, I replied, just getting a feel for the place. There's a lot to take in. I can imagine. He paused. I was wondering if you might need any help. With anything. Moving in or repairs or... The old Emily might have rejected his offer immediately, still wounded by his betrayal. But something had shifted in me these past weeks, a new understanding of human frailty, including my own. Actually, I said, there are some boxes in the attic I might need help bringing down. If you're free this weekend? The relief in his voice was palpable. Yes. After we hung up, I continued my exploration of the house, making mental notes about changes I might want to make. The heavy drapes in the dining room could be replaced with something lighter. The outdated bathroom fixtures needed upgrading. The garden would need attention before summer. But these were all surface changes. The essence of the house, its history, its warmth, its memories, would remain. As evening fell, I found myself back on the front porch, sitting in the swing where my grandmother and I had spent countless hours talking, laughing, and sometimes just being quiet together. The neighborhood settled into twilight, porch lights coming on, the distant sound of children being called in for dinner. My phone buzzed with a text from Trevor. Emily, I know things are weird right now, but Mark and we've been thinking about Grandma Eleanor's education fund and we have some questions. No pressure. I was surprised by the gesture. Perhaps there was a possibility of some kind of relationship with my stepbrothers, separate from the tension with their mother. Sure, I texted back. Coffee next week? His reply came quickly. That would be great. Thanks. As darkness fell completely, I made one final circuit of the house, turning on lights, and in the kitchen, I found my grandmother's old radio still sitting on the windowsill. I turned it on, and soft jazz filled the room, her favorite evening music. Standing there in the gentle glow of the kitchen lights, with familiar music playing, and the comforting sense of home surrounding me. Yes, there were still challenges ahead. Rebuilding a relationship with my father, dealing with Diane's lingering resentment, deciding what to do about the lake house, and figuring out my own path forward. But for now, in this moment, I was exactly where I was meant to be. My grandmother had given me not just a house, but a foundation, a place to stand firm while I navigated the complexities of family, forgiveness. I opened the back door and stepped out onto the porch that overlooked the garden. The spring air was crisp, carrying the scent of blooming flowers. In the distance, I could see the silhouette of the old oak tree where my grandmother had hung a swing for me when I was 8 years old. Thank you, I whispered into the darkness, not sure if I was speaking to the house, to my grandmother's memory, or to from somewhere nearby. An owl called softly, its haunting cry echoing through the quiet neighborhood. I smiled, remembering how my grandmother used to say that owl calls were messages from loved ones who had passed on. Message received, I murmured, wrapping my arms around myself in the cool evening air. Tomorrow would bring decisions and changes, paperwork and planning. But tonight, for acknowledging that sometimes justice comes in unexpected ways, and that setting boundaries, like my grandmother had done with her will, was not an act of cruelty, but an act of love, both for others and for oneself. I took one last look at the garden, imagining how it would look in full summer bloom, then turned and went back inside, closing the door gently behind me. This was home now, my sanctuary, not just of property and possessions, but of my grandmother's wisdom, foresight, and enduring love. As I locked the door for the night, I felt a sense of completion, of coming full circle. My father's words in the driveway that day, "They took your name off the house," had been meant to wound me, to finalize my exclusion from the family property and legacy. But it had been there all along, written in trust documents and in my grandmother's heart, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. In the quiet of the house that was now truly mine, I made a silent promise to my grandmother, to myself, and to the family I might someday create, that this home would always be a place of warmth, honesty, and love, a place where manipulations and deceptions had no power, a place where everyone's name was